Welcome, folks. We're officially live. My neighborhood is in full celebration, yapping it in, welcoming Maribel today. And so I'm super thankful to have you here joining us in conversation with your poetry. For folks who are just tuning in for the first time ever, I'm hanging out every Monday with poets in the beauty of my very vibrant neighborhood. And so we'll get the sounds of all the things as we move along in conversation, talking about what moves you as a poet, who you are, what you do, how you love, how you flow. And with that soundtrack, Maribel, I'll turn it to you so that you can introduce yourself as you see fit.
Sure. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, Narichusku. My name's Maribel Martínez. I'm a queer two-spirit Chicanx person. I use all pronouns. I'm the second and middle child of Teresa Vargas and Rogelio Martínez, que en paz descanse. I'm the granddaughter of Felix Vargas y Concepción Elías, Manuela Pérez y Prisciliano Martínez. I grew up here in East San Jose, and right now I'm here in Mountain Hamilton, where I live now. So definitely want to honor this land and acknowledge the people that came before me who have been taking care of this land, the Ohlone people, Tamian people of this region. I myself identify as Indigenous. My family is of P'urhépecha heritage. Families from Irapuato, Guanajuato, Rancho de los Riveras, and San Antonio el Rico. And yeah, my grandfathers were braceros who also tended this land. My grandmothers were curanderas, hierberas on my abuela Manuela's side, and then my mama Conchita was a dream warrior. And so I grew up here in this area. My mom's a community artist. She's a singer, songwriter, poet. And my dad has an engineer brain. And so I grew I got the exact same number score for verbal that I did for math. And so that's the kind of space that I live in. And I try to build in those spaces, which is why I do kind of a lot of different things. I'm a professor at San Jose State in the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, a colleague of Rosanna. And then I also teach in anthropology. I'm an applied anthropologist by training. And then in my kind of full-time gig, I'm a policy director for the County of Santa Clara. So of course, this segment, I'm on my own time, not on county time, and all of the comments and viewpoints are my own and not attributed to the office in any way. And I'm also a researcher and an artista. I'm a poet. I perform. I sing. I write for Teatro. I write creative nonfiction. I write fiction. And I'm a student of traditional healing arts. So I bring all of that, all of the paquetes, all of the cargas and regalos into the work that I do. And so, yeah, I'm just super fortunate, happy to be here, happy to start off my Monday with some Floricanto and being in community with all of you as we round out Pride Month. And of course, for some of us, we live Pride every day. And even for me, for work, running the Office of LGBTQ Affairs, I think about LGBTQ community every single day. And so, yeah, just really happy to be here with you and share the space.
I love it. And that's exactly why I'm like, y'all introduce yourselves. And I think even then you might have left a few things out, right? And I love that folks get in the habit of calling in who we come from because it very much shapes who we are. And for folks that are chiming in here, Maribel's full disclosure, I love it. You're like, all these words and thoughts and poetry are my own. For the folks tuning in, I put in your little banner on there if they want to check out your website and get an ongoing glimpse into the conversations you're having with yourself and the rest of us when you're not doing all of those other things, right? And writing really becomes this space where we get to unpack and sometimes, I wouldn't say unload, but just put some of that collective responsibility down for a bit. And then it gives us fuerza to keep on keeping on in all of those areas. And I love how multifaceted you are. And so we have that in common, right? And when I jump to introduce you, I'm like, Maribel's here. And some folks are like, yeah, but who are you, señora? And so for the folks who are meeting me for the first time, I am very much myself, shamelessly so, to the point of, you know, my comfortability can be a fault, but it's also my greatest asset. And so if you want to connect and find me, you can do that at the bottom of the screen here. Rosanna Alvarez, para servirles, para mitotearles, para, you know, to enable you in your beauty and your craft. And so thank you again. I love sitting here every Monday with whatever poet wants to roll through and play along, because we're so used to speaking in truth, right? And we have a way of hearing and witnessing the world that lets us sometimes speak those hard truths in a very tender, loving way. And the words might be harsh, but the truths, you know, sting equally the same. And I love that collectively about us. It's good medicine. And so again, thank you for bringing the collective medicine of who you are. I love that folks get to meet you in this domain if they know you in all of those other realms. And I love for the folks who know you as a poet to also know these are the other pieces of you, right? And that when we're poets, we are multifaceted, you know. I think even the folks who have the luxury of sitting there day in, day out at a desk writing their poems, there are other parts of their lives. And the more we can encourage that out of each other, I think part of my work here will be, you know, done, is if I can share as many glimpses into these stories as I can, and to sit in conversation with you and see kind of where it goes organically. So the plan is trust the bigger plan at play. Whew, there is a lot. And I love that the timing played out with you in particular to kind of bring us into this space and close out Pride Month together, because that work is ongoing, and it's truly, it's kind of the way we talk about being danzantes. It's a way of life. We're always caring for our community, always looking out for community. Um, but I think it's a beautiful way to close out the official, you know, marked month of building awareness and growing together and pushing together. So, how are you today beyond all of that?
Good. Yeah. You know, it's been a roller coaster in so many different ways. This last 15 months, I've had a chance to do something that I never imagined doing. I've been working in the Emergency Operations Center for the county. And so for the last 15 months, I've been doing a job that's completely different. So my entire job has been probably like 80% in Espanol. And because I've been leading and doing the language access and doing a lot of the Latinx messaging, so creating original content to give information about the global pandemic.
Right.
And so been in that different space, been super connecting with community. And of course, you know, our county is one of the counties that has been most vaccinated, but we still have a long ways to go within the Latino community, especially in East San Jose and South County. And so just being, you know, it was coming back to East San Jose. I moved in the middle of the pandemic. So like now I'm up in Mount Hamilton, up in this beautiful, beautiful space, up the mountain here with the animalitos. So earlier today, there were some deer and, you know, some hummingbirds. And I just kind of start my day that way. And I'm 40, I turned 40. So it's like, I'm 40 and like figuring shit out. And so I'm in that space of, I think everybody like just reassessing, like, okay, like we survived this pandemic
For sure.
for what? Like, what's the bigger purpose for ourselves? And so it's been really great that in that have also been super fortunate to get this fellowship with MAC.
That fellowship with Makla, right? So I think there we go. For a little bit, you kind of paused out on my end, but you have that fellowship with Makla. Tell us a little bit more about that, because it's an exciting opportunity to connect with the community and with your artist hat in mind, right?
Yeah. So they, you know, the super amazing experience of like, I have time and space and resources to invest in my artistry. And so I have some projects that I'm working on. One project is creating this set of poems around the pandemic. And some folks have heard one already. I did it at the Chicano commencement. I'm at the Chicano Studies graduation. So the first one is Letanía de un estudiante que se gradúa en plena pandemia, litany of the student who graduates amidst the pandemic. And so I'm writing these like poems and like, love notes to ourselves who have experienced something big, whether it's a huge milestone or just an impactful, significant moment amidst this pandemic. Because for many things, the world stopped, and in many ways, the world kept on going. And so just a point of reflection and the fact that, I'm playing with this idea of like people carry poetry in their wallets. A lot of us are used to carrying like little prayer cards or, like religious memorabilia and their poems. And so like we are in the tradition of living in poetry and life. And so like, how could we create and continue that? And then I'm writing this fiction story that, up until last year, I didn't think of myself as a fiction writer. I did a lot of creative nonfiction, kind of memoir, essays, and poetry, and even some playwriting, but not like full-on fiction, which is really, really fun. And the audience here for this fiction piece are for the middle grades, so like 3rd through like 5th grade. And so I'm wanting to learn more about what, 8 to 10-year-olds, like what is their life right now? And like, what are their worries? What are their dreams? And so it's super, super, super fun space to just explore. And Makla is giving me, lots of support to do that.
Lovely. That's awesome. I think we have so many things in common that it's a rare opportunity to connect with you when we're not, with our sleeves all the way up and our hands in the masa and doing the work. And so this is a different kind of work that we get to connect over. And, that idea of folks having poetry in their pocket all the time, or even when you talk about who you come from and your family and your heritage, that in itself is poetry when it's spoken out loud. And so the more we can encourage that from each other is awesome. And, I too am aspiring to write fiction for the youngins, and I've dabbled into nonfiction for that age group. And it's fascinating to kind of put yourself in the mind of a child and think about how curious they are about the world and how loving they naturally are. That in a lot of ways, people think when you write for children, you're writing for children. And it's like, no, I'm writing to kind of leave receipts that I'm listening, right? We're listening. And there's something to be had there by way of good medicine también. So I do know that I have you for a limited time because it is a busy day and you are taking your lunch hour to be here. But I did want to see if you wanted to throw down some poetry in the next few minutes and give folks a glimpse. The one thing I will say for folks tuning in is that having lived up Mount Hamilton myself, for as much as we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, the Wi-Fi up the mountain leaves something to be desired. But the trade-off is you get to hear the birds and see the stars and catch the view of the city lights. And so I'm sure Maribel appreciates that trade-off. But for right now, we're going to have all of the grace and patience to flow in the slower pacing, because I think there is a lesson there too. So I'm just going to roll with it. But when you're ready to throw down a poem, let me know so I can spotlight you and take myself off screen and shut my mouth. And just take it in.
Let's do it.
Échale.
So I'm going to do two little ones. And, I think, as we think about like writing for younger audiences, it's also acknowledging the injuries that we have of childhood and like healing our little tender corazoncitos from that age. And so, so I think, that's the important piece too. And so, so I'll do two little ones right now. This first one is for, I wrote it for this Pride season, for this Pride 2021, just taking into account everything that we're living through. And so this one's Pride. I am pride, papel picado etched out, delicate and loud. I am rainbow, ribbons in my braids, smooth and flowing. They be killing us, but we never die. Échenos tierra que acabo de aquí vengo. Even in death, I live. They try to burn us with their stares, but love, we're all. Me hago cenizas para irme con el viento. In darkness, I fly. All that's gold doesn't glitter, but add glitter to my golden skin and watch me dance. I am bouncing light, vibrant being. While they may refuse to hear my voice, it does not erase my singing, my screaming, my humming. While they try to make me invisible, it does not cancel my body, my space, our territory. Yo abarco. I am color flags, bold stripes waving on this battleground. I am queer, flowering hand, masochil soy. Even in struggle, I bloom. This other short one that I'm going to do is called Recipe for Joy. A pound of I don't give a fuck. 5 dashes of I'm fine. 4 guttural screams into a canyon. 9 catnaps in the sun. 1 ceremonial song. 10 dollops of ven, toma, take it all in. 2 bundles of sage kissed by time. 6 manojos of earth, dirt, mud, and clay. 8 pasos de baile bajo la luna. 3 broken pieces of copal. 7 echoes of I'm okay, you're okay, it'll be okay. Listening to the caress. You're okay, it'll be okay. A taste of honey.
And there's so much medicine and sweet and lots that can be taken from that final word, right? And honey. And I'm telling you, what I've learned about this pandemic and our issues with technology is that we're so used to being like seamlessly go, 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 right?
Yeah.
And so even there are things that are out of our control, things that are in our control when it comes to the technology, but things that are out of our control sometimes feel poetic. Like there was a part in your poem where it just kind of stalled out, but I was like, oh, I'm gonna breathe that last line that I got in. And then, it came right back in. It was almost like there was an intentional hiccup there. And so what I love about sitting with y'all in real time, even with all of these tech glitches and all, is that the cadence in your voice, the tenderness that you read your own words with, become a different kind of ofrenda. And there's medicine even in that rhythm. And sometimes that rhythm is intentional. Sometimes it happens because we're used to talking in a certain cadence and a rhythm and a sing-songy voice. And other times it's the things out of our control. And at the end of the day, there's something about that final, that very like honey at the end. And it just, like, even that word grabbed me in a certain way where I'm like, damn, that was like a really gentle punctuation mark at the end of so much medicina, if you will. And so I am looking forward to having, a collection of your poetry in my hands and being like, look what came in the mail today, right? And I think what's beautiful about, there's a few of us that I'm like, yes. And for folks tuning in, there are a few of us who are like, a previous poet called Las Cuarentonas, and I'm like, oh my God, yes, right, in so many ways, because I think there's this idea that you hit 40 and you should have accomplished all of these things, and it's like, well, we all have, and still there's these things that are still in progress, that todo con su tiempo.
Yeah.
And that we're in our own kind of flow, and the writing takes a certain kind of shape in a certain form that I don't think would have been the same had I been here, like in my 20s, right? And so it's beautiful to me to see all the different kind of access points that people come into ownership and say, I'm listening and I'm ready to share. Because I'm curious, how long have you been writing? And that's like a loaded question, I know. So answer it wherever the wind takes you.
Yeah, you know what? I've been writing since I know how to write. And again, I grew up with a super amazing parents in the sense that my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she's a singer-songwriter. So she's the mom that it would be your birthday, and son las 5 de la mañana, and she'd come in with her guitar and she'd serenade you for your birthday. Or like, instead of buying you like a big expensive thing, because we lived in the East Side, Story and King area. My parents were undocumented most of my childhood. So it was, de poquito, right? We didn't have a whole lot of money. And so she would write us poetry for birthday presents. And so, I remember being a kid and like making up my song. I remember, while other kids were playing, like, I don't know, school or whatever, like,
there was just a difference there, right? Like this marked poetry and the way your life was playing out. And I'm gonna stall here because we got some glitch issues happening in the text. So I'm gonna roll with what's happening, and gonna kind of wait for you to catch up in the bandwidth there. Again, the trade-off of being up in Mount Hamilton. But I love how you're talking about your childhood in the East Side, and how your parents
happening. Our frecuencias are so strong.
I believe it. It happens. I'm like, we just wrapped all the things, including the interwebs, and I'm down with that. I know. So, and I don't mind it that much. Like, it's like, because when we're on the flip side of that, like with students, for example, right? And to feel like folks need to be so apologetic for things that are not in their control, it's like, flex, right? It'll reconnect, it'll recalibrate, just like we do, right? This is almost like even in danza, you might trip, but eventually you're gonna flow back in, and so I'm just gonna roll with it that way, with that in mind. But you were talking about your mom kind of coming up with these very for your birthday poetry and growing up with that in that context. And
so
it definitely it reminded me of like so many ideas about who we're supposed to be, based off of all these narratives, and and people are supposed to like be charitable towards us because of where we're at and who our parents are and what the perception is. And it's like, well, here's this very vibrant story of a beautiful upbringing where, yes, this is the context, yes, this is how the boxes might be checked off, and here's the story, and the story is poetry in itself, right? So I love it.
Like, here's my ACES score.
Yeah.
And then here is my Floricanto as a right, as a product of all of that. And so like, she comes from like, this Mexico education system where like, when you were small, you were like reciting poetry. And I grew up in the 80s in the East Side, which was like very gang impacted. And our safe place was the library. And so I would go to the library, and my librarian, Sandy, who I still remember to this day, and I've seen her since her retirement, and I would just be like immersed in books. And so like, I had this wild imagination because of everything around me. Like I found escape and comfort and refuge in books and stories and poetry, in songs.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's a combined kind of way of reading the world and seeing yourself mirrored back in a lot of ways, right? I'm always like, were we in a library desert? Because where I grew up, it's like there was no library. Now there's the Tully Library, thank God. Like we used to have to go somewhere else if we wanted a library. But our saving grace was that, tucked behind Santee Elementary, Maxa kind of took up space, and the city of San Jose had, their programs, and that's kind of where we would spend our time and get these book recommendations from the college age ladies coming and volunteering with us. And so in that way it kind of became our library, because books again were also my escape and saving grace and exploration. But I think there's poetry, even in that, right? Like, I love that we have that in common. We both grew up in the East Side. And there are so many stories, like to this
Yeah.
day, I will get students say, here's the narrative I was fed growing up in the East Side. And here I am, and it's resistance. And then there's like folks like us who are, well, we're in our 40s now, and we're telling you like there have been stories of us intergenerationally. And so I love how much and how open we are with that history, because it reminds people like there is vibrancy there. There is this capacity to fuel and do so much beautiful work. And it's, again, it's not about that ACEs score, right? And those things are problematic because they don't come from us. And even in all that mess, what always has the capacity to come from us is our Floricanto, our cultura, our arts in so many ways, right? And even the way we show up, that in itself can be a poem. And so I love how you activate that and are transparent about that, because it's not even about reaching back, it's about reflecting back in the here and now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So my library was Hillview Library. So I went to Meyer Elementary, and I was like right across the street. So, and then that process that I think, of like having to walk to and from school, that I think about now, like how different that is for a lot of folks who get dropped off, and, like how much time was spent like just interacting with the space. And to me, like space is such an important character in my poetry, in my writing, just, how everything was about this kind of place-based narrative, because I don't think it could have happened, in anywhere else. And we're so San Jose and Silicon Valley, it's like its own thing. It's so distinct, right? The fact that, we have this deep Chicano, Mexicano history here in San Jose, that just, I think is in everything that we do, and is sometimes made invisible. And I think, when people think of Silicon Valley, they only want to see the tech piece. But we have like wide narratives and deep roots and legacies of activism, of innovation when it comes to like social justice and art. And so I think those are the stories that I really, love to share. And and the way that, like we're so resourceful. We're so resourceful in the Bay Area. And in San Jose, right, where like cost of living is like insane.
Wild.
Yeah, it's wild. And we do it, we do it in so many different ways, and all the different movidas that it takes to survive.
So many movidas. So I was just flashing all the love you were getting while you were sharing your poetry that I'm catching up to right now in the chats. That resourcefulness, right? This kind of, we call it that rascuachismo, but I'm like, it's so much more. Even that's poetry, right? And I don't want to butt it, but it's like, and it's so much more than we can even, folks have written PhD dissertation style explorations of that dynamic, and even then, it's like the poetry of what you can't capture on paper, right? In black and white, there's something else. And I think poetry gives us a glimpse into so many different angles of that something else, right? Gives us a taste of so many something else's that you can't quite capture in the way that we're used to documenting, archiving, putting value on things. And so these things become invaluable in ways that I think our gente have known for a long time. Floricanto is a way to make that exist beyond space and time in a very kind of embodied way, because it pulls on your feelings, right? That's the difference with poetry. Is like poetry is inherently tied to some kind of emotion, and it elicits some kind of a response, and it invites a whole lot of connection. And I'm hearing, earlier on in the conversation, all the pieces of your work do that, right? From the policy piece to the classroom piece to the written piece, they all have that artistry as an undercurrent in it. So
yeah, and I see the policy work too, right? As part of that work, I think, to use Cornel West's language, right? He talks about love, and justice is love in public, and I think like equity is healing in public, and we use all of our healing methods, right? From all the healing methods that we've inherited. And so it has to be poetry, it has to be song, it has to be community, it has to be finding our own voice. And so all of that, I think, is woven into the work that I do. Like, I love teaching in CCS. Like, that is like a joy to be able to interact with young folks, you know, in their transformational period of their college years. But also, you know, I work with community in making sure that we change policy locally, and add programs or change pathways that maybe aren't working. And so all of that to me is using our traditional methods for healing.
Definitely. Follow-up question, right? So you were talking about how you've always been a writer for as long as you can write. There's this coming into your own as a declared poet. When or how do you think you came into that space of comfort and acknowledgement, of even just claiming that for yourself in a way?
You know, I've used that term, and then I'm like, oh wait, but that, no, I take it back. And then I was like, okay, no, but I do this. And okay, no, take it back. I take it back. Right. And I think it's been, I feel a lot more firmly, again, over this last year and a half. And I think because I have a comunidad that I write with now. Super fortunate to have a wonderful maestra, Kathy Arellano, who put together this curriculum through the Las Maestras Center at UC Santa Barbara, through Califas en Comunidad. And so we have a group of folks that we've kept in touch from that cohort, and we write like every other week together, and we just check in and we're writing. And so now I feel like a little bit more, kind of grounded in that, and go like, yeah, it's a practice. I'm in the practice of being a writer. And definitely when folks like Makla, are like, we like what you're doing, we want to support you and invest in you. Then I think it's another step of like, okay, like, I can continue this practice.
Right. Yeah. And there's something that you didn't call it this. This is my just kind of what it triggers in me in a good way is there's almost like this, we come into it when it's not attached to other people in a codependent way, but we're in community. There's almost that sense of responsibility to honor that practice, by going ahead and accepting or declaring that, label, if you will, of being like, yes, I'm a poet, because it implies more than the process of putting pen to paper or, fingertips to the pad there and writing it out. It implies that community, that responsibility, that fact that you've been putting in time, and that other people have been reciprocating that. And it's almost like, yeah, it's not just that other people are saying, yes, call yourself a poet, or introducing yourself in that way, but it's like, it's that choice to go ahead and say, you know what, yes, I'm going to put this feather in my kopili, and it's going to be the one that's consistent, right? Because you can mix it up any way you see fit, but that's there, in its own poetry, right? As acknowledgement of the folks that are now a part of who you also come from in a different way.
Yeah, definitely. It's that you transcend that. I wrote this poem, right? To like, I am in the practice of being a poet. Yeah. I am in the practice of being a writer. It's not an occasional, like, it's just this one thing that I wrote once and never thought about it again. Yeah.
And it's almost a declaration of a commitment, right? I'll continue to listen. I'll continue to document what's being channeled through me. And to some degree, it kind of becomes, even if you stop showing up with a writing group or what have you, like, it's there, it's, you can't turn it off, because the poems decide anyway, even when you're resisting it, right?
Yeah. So true. It'll continue to come. It's just a matter of like, will I write it? Will I publish it? Will I share it? And then that becomes my choice.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So I don't know if you have a third poem to share with us, because I know we're hitting that close to final stretch. We do still have a little bit of time, and I have some other follow-up things I want to ask about. I do want to honor the poetry sharing también.
Sure. So I have an angry one, and then I have a ceremony one. Which one do you want to hear? Or do we do them back to back to maximize some time?
I think start with the one that grabs your eyeballs first, and then let's talk about it for a while, and then let's see what happens with the other one. Sound like a deal?
All right, sounds good.
All right.
So I think this is, I think it's so funny because your last guest also saw lots of similarities. We were also community organizers, happened to be for the same organization, but at different times. And then we also have these kind of like angsty poems about, like white supremacy and the way that it, we see it in our lives, and structural racism. And so before I read this, I want to say that I'm using Karen as an umbrella term, encompassing all of the isms. It's not a specific person. And I also want to disclaim that it's not by any means, if your name is Karen or if you're white, that you encompass any of these things. It's just, I'm using it as a metaphor. In poetry, I get to use metaphors. So it's a metaphor. So I'll do this one. This is called F.U. Karen. Another funeral announcement. Another brown body laid to rest. Another queer brown body gone. I lay with them, my spirit inexplicitly intertwined with theirs. I die too with them. I've wished for the end to come. Why 15 and not me at 40? Why I forced to witness? Suicide is murder by your hands, Karen, because we don't want to die, but you have made living so impossible. Your motherfucking white capitalist gaze, fear and hate, your putrid rule following boxes, your lust for blood since the days of invasion, conquest, and inquisition. Save your fucking prayers. Light a candle for yourself. Because we, my beautiful joteria, are perfect. It's you who needs saving.
I had to linger there for a bit because that was all the damn truth. And a part of me also was like, was that the angry poem or the ceremonial poem? Because it felt like ceremony too, with some hot rocks for sure. Those are the kind of poems that needs to be said and it needs to be heard. And I struggle with some of those on that frequency because they can also be weaponized against us, right? And so I want to acknowledge that you were like, yes, I am all of those things, and I am responsible for these things in who you are and the work that you do. And I have this ofrenda here. And was it angsty? I don't know, right? But it was definitely true. It was definitely so many of our truths. And there's this space where we get to cuando estamos hartos, right? Like we're just so done with how things are not changing. And all people can do is offer thoughts and prayers. And where's what comes next? And we know it's possible because it's come before, right? Like those things that we're asking for preceded you. And here you are, right? Giving me your thoughts and prayers. And there's something about you modeling, who you are in people's minds with your policy work, and then saying, and this is who I am as a poet with this ofrenda, and I'm going to say it anyway. And so, just from poet to poet, thank you for that example. Because that poem I have on the same frequency has been roaring in my damn ear and biting at my hip and saying, just let me out already. And I keep thinking, and how will I have to shield myself from the possible repercussions? And the reality is that those repercussions are already there. That's the reason why the poem even exists. So I don't know if you want to tackle any of those pieces.
Yeah, and I think, so again, as poets, right, we work with metaphor. And we're writing from a viewpoint of like what we're experiencing and what we're seeing, or even what we've heard. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be like our own experience, but it's what are the stories that we carry. And so I almost feel like we have to write the social commentary, and we have to explain it as well, so that folks can digest it, and metabolize it. And that's why I say, like, there are these disclaimers of like, I'm not saying people. It's easier to talk person to person and make it interpersonal, but I'm really talking about our institutions and systems.
Yes.
And I'm just using this name as a metaphor for the institution. And so I'm not holding any individual responsible, although we all have individual accountability. I'm really just talking about the institutions and the systems, in a way that, again, is digestible when we make it into the interpersonal metaphor. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we're all in it together. And I'm the first to also talk about, when we talk about structural racism, and we take the historic long view, there's so many things that have injured our community, all of our communities. Nobody has gone unscathed. Even folks in power have injuries from structural racism. It takes a toll. The body keeps score, and they have bodies, and they keep those stories as well. And so we're all impacted, differing degrees, differing access points, different ways to unpack and process. But we all as a society take a toll because of the injustice that we've all lived through.
Right. And that little tiny piece reminds me of Resma Mannequin's work where he's talking about whiteness and grappling with it, and inviting folks to sit in that discomfort so that they can metabolize it, right? And it's almost like that expression, I feel personally attacked. Well, if you feel personally attacked, pay attention to the feelings in your body. What are you carrying intergenerationally, perhaps, of why that triggers something in you? Versus getting confused from the metaphor to the person-to-person attack. It's like that sense of attack is telling you something, and we need to learn how to listen to it. And I think that on the flip side, that I don't even call it racial battle fatigue. It's more like fuckery fatigue, because it comes from all, beyond race. And there's this response that we're all used to carrying attention, or, our shoulders, or like it shows up in our health. And there's something about a lot of us become very aware of our bodies. And then there are some of us who normalize that, right? And it becomes something else. And so what I appreciate about your metaphors too is it's like we have an opportunity to really pay attention and take stock and take notice and react. Because I think sometimes those words need a kind of sting so that we can get a different kind of reaction, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, for some of us who've been doing this work for a long time, it's resiliency fatigue. Like, I don't want to have to be resilient. I wanted to just be. I don't want to always have to have built up strength because I've gone through hardship. I want to just have a cleared path, right? Like, that would be amazing. And the offset to that is that hopefully by me doing some of the hard work, that it might be easier for the folks coming after me. And that's, we have some consolation there.
That is the truth. So there was the other poem before we do run out of time that was in fact ceremony. And now I'm curious, and I'm like, well, if that angsty poem felt like a ceremonial poem, what might the ceremonial poem feel like?
Okay, let's do that one then.
All right.
Okay, so this one is Calling Back. This is a ceremony. This is a ceremony calling. This is a ceremony calling you. This is a ceremony calling you back to your sacredness, your joy, your life, your spirit that needs no validation, wants nothing in return, invites you just to be. I wonder, who am I? Where am I? What is this time? The same as it was, same as it's ever been. The struggle is one of centuries. Open wounds, cauterized hearts, walking ghosts in memory. But you want to live. You choose to live. You will to live. And it's not easy. They don't make it easy. There are obstacles in your path, same as it was, same as it's ever been. You day-old shit. But you crave change. You desperately need change, and you. This is a ceremony. This is a ceremony calling. This is a ceremony calling you. This is a ceremony calling you back to your ancestors. Do you hear their prayers? Medicine song, beating drum. Your foot moves, it remembers. Your leg twitches, it recalls. The hips sway, they rejoice. Your arms flail, they are awoken. Neck swivels, head bops, body dances. It is alive. Same as it was, same as it's ever been. Knots in your throat. Only way to dislodge is to scream. Only way to undo is to spit. Only way to transform is to sing. So sing. Sing your name. Let it merge with the sky and land back within you. Sing your sorrow and let it sink and bury itself back into the damp earth. Sing your future. Cut the cords and build bridges. This is a ceremony. This is a ceremony calling. This is a ceremony calling you. This is a ceremony calling you back to you.
I felt that one in a different way, for sure. For sure. And it's a curious thing that I'm listening to you talk about how your hips will sway, and it's I am a danzante, and the drums have always called me, and it took a while for me to respond and trust that, pull of the drums. And we've been in this pandemic trying to be cautious and careful with our calpuli, and we came back to full-on ensayos recently. And I know your poem wasn't just about danzantes and ensayos, it's about the metaphor. And I feel like danzantes are that living metaphor. In the circle or not, we're always in ceremony. And I kept thinking to myself, how am I going to remember these danzas, right? And I kept telling myself, you just got to trust your body, and you just got to not think. And then you got your brain like battling for your body's, and your body's like, I have autonomy, just let me listen to the drum and go. And in those moments where you're able to really show up in that ceremony, you just flow, right? The way that the words and the poetry flow when you make the practice of showing up that way. And so there's something in terms of ongoing ceremony and existing ceremoniously that I feel like sometimes we forget about the poetry and the practice and how we live our lives as a result of that. And so yeah, definitely felt the difference there, in that way. And
Yeah,
that everybody, right?
yeah, and I'm not a danzante. That's not, kind of my practice. But just sometimes the merging of like these traditional healing methods, like, limpias and barridas, where you are asked to do some of this work. And for me, being, a person in the queer community and in my own, Mexicana, Chicana, indigenous background, that it's that same ceremony and practices that we take when we go to the club and we find the safe space to dance and sing out loud, and it could be off key, but you just like acknowledge yourself being alive. And or, you could be at home by yourself and like you turn on you put on your jams and you're singing and you're dancing and you're like, yes, I'm here and I'm finding joy. And it was so funny. A couple of friends, we got together yesterday just to have like our little mini pride. And sure enough, by the end of the night, like we're like, oh my God, this is my jam. And like we, had like turned up the volume and we were dancing, we were singing like these songs that were like, oh my God, I can't remember. I know the words of the song still from when I was 14. And then you just like, you just acknowledge that like in that space, in that remembering, in that expression, in that ofrenda, like, you're alive and you're sacred.
Yeah. And I think that's some of what we overlook, right? Because our Calpuli reminds us, yes, we show up and we embody this metaphor. And your poem reminds us like it's in all of those things. And the sweeping was a part of collective ceremony, and the finding joy and the connecting and the dance in different domains and spaces, and that activation of memory across space and time through a song, right? And there are certain songs where you hear them and you're like, I remember where I was at this point and I was jamming with this. And sometimes it's, in the back of a car with the window open, and it was those old school cars where you had to put the window down like this. But it's that activation of story and remembrance being ceremony. And that critical to that is our existence. And so we gotta live joyfully when we can and find it when it's being targeted the heck out of us, right?
Yeah, and then we've been doing that for a long time. Like we come from generations of folks that have been finding ceremony and joy for so many things that have survived previous pandemics, previous waves of genocide, previous just atrocities, and y aquí estamos, right? And so like this is our experience in this moment. This is our human experience of being spiritual beings in this human experience, and this is how we're carrying through those legacies. But this isn't new for us. We've since start of millennia, right? And so we've been doing this work. That's why we're still here.
Right. It reminds me of that John Trudell, right? All you have to do is remember. And it's not about learning something different, it's remembering. And so in that way, poetry feels very much like an ongoing ceremony of remembrance, and not just remember backwards, but like remembering, yes, that legacy, but remembering in terms of putting yourself back to whole, And so I appreciate the glimpse into your poetry and the story of who you are in progress. But as a part of this bigger legacy that we've always been collectively anchored in our indigenous values. One parting question, because we are getting to the last few minutes here. And I'm fighting the temptation to be like, give us another poem. And I'm like, she already shared 4, relax. We'll buy the book soon. Right.
I can end it with the last one.
Oh, I won't be opposed to that. But before you jump into that last one then, and I'm so excited, is for the folks waiting on your collection, a good place to keep up with you would be by way of your website. But another lingering question that I had was for folks who engage in that practice of secret poetry. Do you have any words of encouragement for them, or for folks, who like us are multifaceted, and that one lingering piece of permiso, so that they can own it as they see fit? What might you tell someone watching out in that way?
If you're watching this and you're wondering, are you a poet? Do you want to, you have this inclination? This is your sign. This is your validation. This is your moment. I'm asking you, por favor, take on that title, begin writing, begin sharing your writing. You're watching this, and this is the intervention that you need. Be that. So this is the permiso, and just do it, because you have a calling, and it's there, and we desperately need to hear your voice.
And that drum beat will only get louder the longer you ignore it, so you might as well flow with it. And for folks out there who are like, I'm ready, I have a little sampling of things I want to share too, hit me up. You know, I'm all about uplifting, and I hate the word amplifying, but it's like, there's a platform here, you might as well use it. Not published, I don't care. You know, come through, because there are little gems of wisdom collectively that I feel are such a gift, even for me to be able to sit with you and listen to you talk about your story and your poetry. And then there's something beautiful about having access to your own words later, because you can come back to this and hear how you share your poem, and you get to decide, you know, what that means for you and your communities. And so, because you did offer this final closing poem, échale when you're ready.
Yeah, so I'll share this one, and this is the one, some of you have already heard it if you were at the CCS graduation. So this is the first of the series that I'm doing for Makla, again, talking about the prayers, but it's also the remembering of what we just lived through in this pandemic and the shutdown. And so I'm trying to decide if I do it Spanish and English or just do the one or the other. But if folks want to stay a little bit after, okay, I'll do both, and I'll say it fast. So this is Letanía para el estudiante que se gradúa en plena pandemia. Okay. Que cuando pienses que el mundo se acaba entre tormentas, incendios, relámpagos, truenos y terremotos, solo anuncie tu reencuentro entre la naturaleza. Que al igual que el clima alrededor, tú también eres mudable, y que al mal momento pronto pasará, las nubes y la alegría son ciclos sagrados. Que en momentos de ruptura, después de dar todo, cargando dolor de injusticia mezclado con violencia y no saber ni en dónde estás, recuerdes de dónde vienes y quién eres. En momentos exhaustos, cuando pensabas no poder más, tomaste pausa, mas no te rendiste. Que si en plena pandemia sobreviviste y alcanzaste, fue porque en ti hay semillas y raíces. Que al mirar a tus padres, abuelos, familiares, ellos verán su propio reflejo en tus ojos, ojos que ven un mundo sin límites, la mirada en el más allá de las montañas, donde las barreras sirven solo para saltar más alto. Los obstáculos los vencerás. Tu ser un puente, tú un abrecaminos, emprendiendo sueños nuevos por todos lados. Mirando atrás, este último año ha sido una batalla que comienza con rayos de luz y cierra con rayos de luna día tras día, que se gana un día a la vez y tú llevas ventaja. Ahora, al final de esta etapa, al saber que has llegado, por todas las noches de desvelo, el descanso, por todos los momentos de dudas e incertidumbre, la confianza en ti, por todo el ajetreo, la calma de ser, por todo el sacrificio, el triunfo, por todas las investigaciones, pensamientos y ensayos, tu diploma. Especialmente hoy, recuerda el legado que has heredado, que eres parte de una línea larga de seres que te amaron tanto, que dejaron todo por darte a ti lo que ellos no alcanzaron, lo que siempre desearon, lo que nunca pedirán, pero tú puedes soñar, tú sí tienes opciones, tú sí puedes volar. Y al volar dirás cantando, sonriendo, llorando, yo soy, yo puedo, yo seré, yo logré, yo seguiré, no pararé. So then the English version is Litany of the Student Graduating Amid the Pandemic. That when you think the world is ending, between storms, fires, lightning, thunder, and earthquakes, it's just announcing your reunion with nature. That like the weather around you is also mutable, and the tough times will soon pass. Clouds and joys are sacred cycles. That in moments of rupture, after giving everything and not knowing where you are, holding pain of injustice laced with violence, remember where you come from and who you are. In exhausted moments when you thought you couldn't take it anymore, you took breaks but did not give up. That if in the middle of the pandemic you survived and reached further, it is because in you are seeds and roots. That when looking at your parents, grandparents, relatives, they will see their own reflection in your eyes that see a world without limits, your gaze set beyond the mountains, where barriers serve only as jump-off points. Obstacles you will overcome. You're being a bridge, you a trailblazer, sprouting new dreams everywhere. Looking back, this last year has been a battle that begins with rays of light and closes with moonbeams day after day, one that is won one day at a time, and you have the advantage. Now at the end of the stage, knowing that you have arrived, for all the sleepless nights, rest. For all the moments of doubt and uncertainty, the confidence in yourself. For all the hustle, the calm of being. For all the sacrifice, the triumph. For all the inquiries, reflections, and essays, your diploma. Especially today, remember the legacy you have inherited, that you are part of a long line of beings who loved you so much that they left everything to give you what they did not have, what they always wanted, what they will never ask for. But you can dream. You have choice. You can fly. And when you fly, you will say, singing, smiling through tears, I am, I can, I will be, I achieve, I will continue, I won't stop. I am, I can, I will be, I achieve, I will continue, I won't stop.
Indeed. I love how each piece kind of activates something different in Spanish and then something different in English. And, it speaks for itself in Spanish, it speaks for itself in English. There's something about like hearing them both and catching the layers of each version that comes through. And there's something that folks say gets lost in translation, but there's also something that gets said in translation. And I appreciate both. So thank you, Maribel Martinez, for being here in this virtual space with me and spending a Monday afternoon closing out Pride Month, but also inviting other people into their ongoing poetry and activating the legacy of who we've always been. Folks looking to find Maribel, make sure you grab that, screenshot it if you want to. Visit the link, stay caught up in all the projects that she is a part of. For folks looking to connect with me, you can find me in Pleno Mitote right there in other spaces. And if you come across me under a different website, it's probably me too, because, ridiculously compartmentalized to a fault. You can also find me on rosannaalvarez.com, and I'm happy to connect with you, your poetry, your journeys, your words, your danza, your ongoing ceremony. Y con eso, folks, hasta la otra. Happy Monday. Make the week of it what you will. If you've got time to rest, take it. That's resistance. And así nos vamos. Pero siempre fuertes. Gracias.